Hi, and welcome once again to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today, the title of our article is The Gutenberg Bible Changes Everything. So when you hear that title, I think you have a good idea of what to expect. Now, when you hear Bible, and if you're thinking about printing, you will have to think of Gutenberg.
That's right. This is hands down one of the most influential people of the past 2,000 years. In fact, there was a book written about the most influential people of the past 2,000 years, and Mr. Gutenberg ended up at number 8, which is pretty good for a guy that just printed books.
Now, when you learn history in the West, it's a big deal, and that was the invention of movable type. But China had it 400 years earlier.
This is the funniest part of history, too. So the more Western history you learn about all these landmark dates and things that happen, these important events transforming the Western world. And then you learn a little bit more history, and it almost always goes like this. In the West, this important thing happened, and the world was never the same. But the Chinese did it like 300 years earlier.
And that happens for many, many things.
So many things. So many things. And this is it. This is one of them, just like Karen said. Before Gutenberg had his movable type, the Chinese were doing this for 400 years. It's unbelievable. That's the time from now to almost Leonardo da Vinci. That's bonkers.
That's right. And actually, China invented many, many things that were not passed down because the inventor was killed.
Yeah, or they were like prevented from ever getting it out. And
right.
It took like literally spies and people smuggling them out, risking their lives in order to share these technologies for enrichment along with what was known as the Silk Road.
Okay, so let's get to our article. Our title again is The Gutenberg Bible Changes Everything. Physical books are everywhere. You can buy them at bookstores or borrow them from libraries. You can even find some for sale in convenience stores. The prevalence of books in modern times hasn't always been the case, though. In the past, books were rare and valuable items that only the extremely wealthy could afford to own.
For much of human history, books had to be painstakingly written by hand. It could take a scribe several years to copy all the words of a book, so they, not surprisingly, came at an enormous price. One book could cost an average person a lifetime's worth of their earnings. This made books available only in specific locations like churches, universities, or the homes of the elite. However, the publishing of the Gutenberg Bible on February 23rd, 1455, changed all this.
The Gutenberg Bible was the first book produced in the Western world using a printing press with movable metal type. While similar technology had been in use in East Asia for over 400 years, this was the first time the method was adopted in Europe. The Gutenberg Bible was the creation of Johannes Gutenberg, who also invented the printing press, metal types, and oil-based ink used to produce the book. The new movable metal type consisted of blocks of individual letters or symbols that could be rearranged to create different words or phrases. The type was then coated in ink and pressed onto paper.
The production of the Gutenberg Bible showed that books could be produced on a mass scale. Quality did not have to be sacrificed to make books quickly. Not long after the release of the first Gutenberg Bible, books became much cheaper and more available to people from all walks of life.
This is such an important thing.
I could talk about this for days.
Bringing knowledge into the hands of the people.
This was transformational. It is hard to understate how important of an invention this was.
Bigger than the internet, I think. Let's go back to our title, The Gutenberg Bible Changes Everything, and that just repeats what Chris and I just said. Physical books are everywhere, so even though a lot of people now read books on their devices, we still have lots of physical books. I'm not so sure about young people now, but I know that even my kids and their kids, they still love physical books.
I'll say I teach a lot of young children, and sometimes I visit the homes of these young children. I've known their parents for years at this point, and their houses are still filled with books, especially for kids.
Yeah,
I think kids especially have lots of physical books.
Right.
I wonder if there's not, like in the market, that doesn't reflect it. More digital books for older people, for adults. Kids still go physical.
Thank goodness. that they're still using that because a lot of kids, they are also using screens. They quickly get addicted to them. So it's good that we still have physical books. You can buy them at bookstores or borrow them from libraries. And I have to mention something here. Amazon has tried to basically outlaw libraries. They have tried to make it impossible for people to borrow books from libraries, so they are forced to buy from Amazon.
Yeah, interestingly, libraries as an initial concept were attempted to be outlawed. And so here we are coming full circle with Amazon now trying to push libraries out the door again.
They are very, very important. You can even find some for sale in convenience stores, and that's true. Some really popular books, you can get them in convenience stores. That means they are selling well. The prevalence of books in modern times hasn't always been the case, though, so we take it for granted now, but things were not always like this. In the past, books were rare and valuable items that only the extremely wealthy could afford to own.
Okay, let's look at a little grammar point in the previous sentence. Hasn't always been the case. For my students, this is something they often struggle with. The present perfect tense plus like always, right? Don't forget, when we have always, this means something is true today. And this is the most important part. Something is true today, and we're asking about the past. Was it also true in the past? If we use have always, I don't speak Chinese, have always, it means today is true. For example, you could say, have you always lived in Taipei? This means that you live in Taipei right now. In the past, did you also live in Taipei? If you can't answer yes now, you can't use this grammar. Mm-hmm. This is something I see used wrong all the time.
It is relevant to the present moment.
That's right. So let's talk about the books that only the extremely wealthy could afford. At the advent of libraries, at the dawn of libraries, books were no longer so expensive. However, they were not trusting of the people borrowing books because they often came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And so just like you have a pen chained to a desk at a bank, books used to be chained to the desks at libraries.
Because people would definitely steal them. They were high-value items.
You would take a book, they would take you to a desk for you to read it, and then they would chain it to the desk, which is such a funny thing to think about.
It is, but I know that later on I stopped loaning books to people because they were not coming back.
They're terrible about returning things, aren't they?
I don't think I am. I'm very careful. Because
have you ever done that?
I don't think so.
Boy, are we about to get like all sweaty and stand on a soapbox about this? I hate when people do that.
That's why I stopped loaning them. I told them, here is the title. You can order it online.
Right. If someone lends you their book or property and you don't return it, I'm going to judge you, okay? I'm telling you that now. What a terrible person you are.
That's right. And once I loaned some books to someone, and then when he was cleaning out his office, he just had a pile of books that he was throwing out, and there were a bunch of my books in there.
Oh, I remember I lent a professor one of these videos I had been using, and I even pestered him to give it back, and he kept brushing me off, and I was just like, fine, keep it. I don't care about the $15 or whatever. I was so mad. I'm like, you're in education. What are you doing?
But it hurt our relationship.
Exactly. It hurt our relationship too. Yeah. Boy, we're going to get on such a soapbox. Okay. Let's move to the next paragraph. For much of human history, books had to be painstakingly written by hand. What an understatement. What an understatement.
It takes a lot of effort to write by hand. And in the one class that I still teach, I require that students do not use their devices. They can have their phone handy because sometimes we have to look something up. But they are not allowed to take notes into a laptop or an iPad. I said, you need a regular paper notebook and a pen. And you take notes, writing them out yourself, because people have found that actually you learn and remember things better when you write them out. They can go home then, and then they organize their notes, and then they type them up into a document and print them out, and that's fine. But when you are taking down the knowledge, do it by hand.
I agree. Painstakingly means with great effort. And these were works of art. This wasn't just copying the words word for word. You were drawing pictures and labeling and lettering. I mean, this was a massive undertaking that took hours of your day each and every day. It was very hard work.
And there was a special profession that people sometimes had. Usually it was a monk. It was illumination of manuscripts. It was usually the first letter of the first sentence of a new chapter or a new paragraph or something, they would make a very large letter, like a letter I, the first letter of in, and then they would fill it in red, and then they would make decorations and add illustrations. Those were illuminators.
You'll see those in Gutenberg Bibles or facsimiles of them if you ever take a look at them. Those were still present in these books that we'll talk about later. It could take a scribe, that's the person that writes the books. It could take a scribe several years to copy all the words of a book, so they, not surprisingly, came at an enormous price. You were essentially paying for this person's whole income. Let's continue. One book could cost an average person a lifetime's worth of their earnings.
What are you going to eat?
Yeah. So most people were farmers, peasants. They lived kind of hand to mouth, meaning they didn't have any extra. So one of these books where they were just unavailable to anybody except the absolute wealthiest people of society.
And you had to be able to read besides.
Yeah.
Okay.
This made books available only in specific locations like churches, universities, or the homes of the elite. And not even just like regular elites. We're talking kings, princes, queens.
Right. People who had enormous businesses and actually probably were very corrupt and had a lot of money. And so you wouldn't have access to those if you were just an ordinary person or a farmer. And churches, it's going to be a lot of holy books. And if you're like a kind of a farmer who's just dressed up in your farming clothes, you're probably not going to walk into a church and start reading. You may not be able to read in the first place. Universities, also, you probably have to be a professor or student to get access. So even if it's there, it's not easy for an ordinary person to walk in and use it or read it.
Karen brings up an extremely important point here that I will come back to after our next sentence here. However, the publishing of the Gutenberg Bible on February 23rd, 1455, changed all this. Okay, so for just a little historical context, this is the somewhat early Ming Dynasty. When Gutenberg produced his Bible, he wasn't just some regular guy. Karen mentioned that your average farmer's not walking into the church and reading the Bible. First of all, they're not going to let him do it. Number two, it's in Latin. This person probably hasn't been educated in Latin. Number three, if you were at a university, if you were at a church or a priest, your family had some kind of wealth and status. Gutenberg also had this wealth and status. But if he had wealth and status, what was he doing as a printer? Well, his father originally was what was called a patrician. He had this wealth and status in society, but his first wife died and he remarried, and this was Gutenberg's mother. Gutenberg's mother was a commoner, and this meant that when Johannes grew up, he would not be able to inherit the status and name of his father, and so he had to find his own way in the world. He had a wealthy father that had ability to educate him, so he could learn Latin. He could learn to read and write. And this gave him an ability to enter a specialized field that later led him to inventing the printing press. This wasn't just some inventor guy. He had a unique and special background that most people would never have access to in his day and age.
One important lesson from this is what you often see as a disadvantage or something that's unfair to you will often turn out to be something that helps you succeed in a very special way.
That's right. Karen is absolutely correct that the average person of the day could not read or write. And this is the reason why I often in my own classroom say, you don't trust your eyes to study, you trust your ears. A lot of English rules and grammar are based upon your ear, not upon your eye.
That's right. That's exactly true.
Gutenberg's Bible altered the price from a lifetime's wage to about 3 years' wage for a clerk. So there's a drastic price decrease not long after his books were published.
Still not generally affordable, but it's still possible.
Yeah, from a lifetime's wage to 3 years.
Okay. The Gutenberg Bible was the first book produced in the Western world using a printing press with movable metal type. And that is the key. We did have other ways to write or to make copies of books. We just mentioned copying by hand. Before China had movable type, they had actually prints that you could make out of a wooden plate. You carve one text into the wooden plate, but you couldn't move the words around and reuse it. It was only good for that page.
That's exactly right. This is what was also used in the West for a long time leading up to the movable metal type. And this is the invention that instead of just one block of wood, which is useful for the Bible, you're producing a lot of them. You're producing it over and over again, but you couldn't make a wide variety of materials. And so carving out individual little letters that you could rearrange allowed for a broader variety of text.
Okay, that's called woodblock printing. While similar technology had been in use in East Asia for over 400 years, this was the first time the method was adopted in Europe. So China had it in the 11th century, and they used actually porcelain clay to make movable type. So China had it much, much earlier. The Gutenberg Bible was the creation of Johannes Gutenberg, who also invented the printing press, metal types, and oil-based ink used to produce the book. So in addition to the printing machine, the printing press itself, you also need to invent the type. That means you had to have many copies of the different letters in metal. And then you had to have the right kind of ink that would transfer from the metal onto paper and stick to the paper.
Now, this oil-based ink, I should say, was actually mostly carbon, so basically coal, and that would create the nice black color. But it was mixed with various metals, and what kind is not so important here. And so it's actually a varnish. It sits on the page. And if you look at a Gutenberg Bible, one thing you'll notice is that it's very shiny because it's metal, it's metallic, and it's quite reflective in the light. And so when you see them displayed, they're often offset from the light, so it's not kind of too hard to read.
And that's one of the things that makes them so precious now. The new movable metal type consisted of blocks of individual letters or symbols that could be rearranged to create different words or phrases. So now instead of making a new block for every page you want to print, you make one block and then you can move the words and letters around and use them again for a new page.
And people would have to carve them in reverse order because when you're printing them, it's making like a mirror image. And so the carver had to be quite good and constantly remember, don't write the letter the correct way. You need to do it in the reverse order.
That reminds me of all the selfies we see of people, and there's like some words written on it, and they're all in reverse.
Yeah. Did you ever take like a picture and look at it in the mirror when you were a kid? Yeah, that was like you hold up a photograph in the mirror to see.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's what people do all the time now with selfies. Okay, the type was then coated in ink and pressed onto paper.
So here's a fun little fact about Gutenberg. Everyone's like, wow, Gutenberg Bible, so amazing. And these books were very valuable. But Gutenberg was not a very good businessman. And he ended up going broke, and he lost control of half of his business. And so while he made sales that would bring in a lot of income, unfortunately, the technology up front was very expensive, and he wasn't the best manager of money. And so he lost a lot of cash on this.
That happened to a lot of inventors and authors.
Okay, so while we're talking about Gutenberg's Bible, let's talk about the format that was used. If you open a Bible, even today, it doesn't look like a novel. It's not words written top to bottom. There are 2 columns on each page, which realistically equates to 4 pages on 2 pages. And really only the Bible does this. And there's a reason for that, because the earliest religious documents were written on scrolls. Now, a scroll is a very long piece of cloth that were used long before books, and they were written top to bottom. Because if you were writing a scroll like a book, like a novel would today, you would have to keep moving your chair. And it's kind of annoying, right? You'd keep moving it left and right. Yeah. So scribes got into the habit of writing 2 columns on each part of each scroll, and it would move left and right as they went. So because this was the first kind of book in the modern sense, Gutenberg actually just transferred this ancient scroll method of writing 2 columns on a piece of scroll directly into his new book format. And
I didn't
that is carried over. This is why when you open a Bible today, it has those weird columns.
2 columns, yeah.
Could you imagine opening a Bible today and it has like that normal novel format?
No.
Wouldn't that just be the weirdest thing?
Weird.
Super weird.
I've seen it that way my whole life. I just couldn't change.
You would never think of it that way, right?
No.
Dude, we should totally try to find a Bible that's written like in a novel format.
Actually, some of the newer translations.
They don't do the double columns?
The Bible in modern English, you will find like paperbacks where they don't do that. But in any traditional Bible, it's always in 2 columns.
The 2 columns on each page. That's funny. All right, let's look at our final paragraph today. The production of the Gutenberg Bible showed that books could be produced on a mass scale.
And that's what the internet has brought us now, too. So things that we could only do at a very small scale before, the first thing that someone in a startup will ask is, will it scale? That means, can we sell a lot of it without a lot of extra effort and spending a lot of money. And that's what we can do now with apps and with anything electronic because it can be reproduced almost infinitely at almost no extra cost.
On a mass scale is a great phrase. You should probably underline that one. Quality did not have to be sacrificed to make books quickly. Well, at later on, like at first, this was very laborious, and these people would just be covered in this oil-based ink. It was quite nasty. Even until modern times, you had something called a printing devil, and these were the people that helped produce your newspapers. They would be covered head to toe in black ink while producing your daily newspaper at the turn of the century.
It wasn't so bad when I was young. My father ran a printing business, so I got to know quite a bit about it.
Interesting.
And his printing people, the people who ran the printing press, they were extremely clean. And he was really meticulous about cleaning up the rubber plate and everything after he was done. He spent like maybe 45 minutes to an hour just cleaning the press.
Let's continue. Not long after the release of the first Gutenberg Bible, books became much cheaper and more available to people from all walks of life.
Thank goodness for that. But there's something else to think about. People often said in the past, if only we had broader access to information, we wouldn't have so much divisiveness and so much extremism. But even with access to all this information, we still have all the same problems.
Yeah, I remember early on the internet was characterized as this ultimate leveler of the playing field, and how all this access to information will get rid of just like ridiculousness.
We wouldn't have conflicts anymore.
Doesn't it feel like all of that has been proven wrong?
Yeah, as though having access to information would solve the problems. But people actually package up the information they like, and then they find followers, and then somebody else does the same thing with a different set of information. They don't read each other's stuff, and they are totally unwilling to. The conflict is still there and maybe worse. Okay, we have 2 questions for you. Number 1, why were books originally very expensive?
Well, that's easy. It took years to copy all of the words by hand. It was very laborious. It was painstaking.
Okay, and our second question, what items did Johannes Gutenberg invent?
Well, he invented a printing press and then that movable metal type and his oil-based ink. And finally, before we go today, as of 2009, you can still find Gutenberg Bibles all over the world. However, they're more likely to be found in some places than others. 37 of these Bibles are in Europe, 11 are in the United States, and 1 is in Japan, leaving us just 49 left.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. If you cannot see the real thing, I bet you can see it online.
You definitely
might want to have a look. That's it for today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.